Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. It is all said and done. The smoke is cleared, and the San Antonio Spurs are your new NBA champions for the 2013-2014 season. Man, and what an exciting series, but more importantly, a very dominant series, something that probably will be talked about in years to come. And I can't wait for us to kind of break down this discussion, to give the recap regarding the finals. You know, I got my right-hand man, 50 grand, NBA aficionado, Dime contributor, writer for one of the illest websites, shawsports.net. My man Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. How are you doing this evening?
I'm a little sad, man. You know, the NBA Finals is over, and we have no more basketball until late October. That's brutal, if you ask me. And then obviously the finals were a 5-game series that I don't think anybody really expected to go down. Unfortunately, you know, like I said, it's over. San Antonio Spurs are the champions, five-time champion now. But we got to talk about this series and everything that went down, and also, you know, get ready for the NBA draft in a few weeks as well.
Most definitely. And we have an actual full panel with us tonight to discuss this and give recap of the 2014 NBA Finals. Some really great writers and guys who kind of kept their hand on the pulse regarding the NBA Finals, you know, from the beginning to the end. Let's first start off from the left hand over to the right. You know, we got our boy, the Heat writer for High Hoops, my man, Mr. Diego Quezada. He's representing out down there for the MIA. What's going on, Diego?
Thanks for having me on. I'm doing well. All things considered, you know.
All things. We know there's a little bit of that melancholy effect. It stings a little bit. You know, I don't want you to feel like this should be new to you because, you know, back in 2011 you felt that before. So we'll probably get into which one feels worse. And because I had actually posted that question, people's perspective about which should hurt more for them. This NBA Finals or the one where they got upset by the Dallas Mavericks. Also with us tonight, we have he came in, boy, you know what I'm saying? He flies in right at the nick of time. We got our man Paul Garcia, one of the Spurs head writers out there. How's it going, Paul?
Good. My computer wasn't working, couldn't figure it out, so actually my iPhone came in handy and saved the day.
All right. I was about to say, did you call on Greg Popovich? Because Greg Popovich is everything. So I wouldn't have been surprised if your laptop broke down that, you know what I'm saying, you pulled out a Popovich to get on with this. All right. And with us as well, too, writer for Project Spurs, our man Quixem Ramirez. He is also a San Antonio Spurs lead writer. How's it going, Quixem?
Doing well. I mean, if all things considered, I'm kind of sad, too. I'm kind of going through, although even though it went the way I wanted to, the NBA, I'm kind of going through some withdrawals there. So. All
right. Well, listen. You know, this is what we love about basketball and the way that it's grown. It doesn't stop, even though the finals has stopped. We don't get to see basketball games like we did with this NBA Finals between the Heat and the Spurs. But I can tell you that it's got to be a really exciting time, knowing that everything did not go the way that everyone planned. Everybody walked in with this expectation that the Miami Heat eventually or should eventually would have walked out as the 3-time NBA champions. And the San Antonio Spurs took it upon themselves to right the wrongs of last year. And really, not just more than anything else, they exercised a lot of demons. And we'll get into that. But let's just really look at this series holistically. And I'm going to start with you, Shaw, to kind of lead us into this. You know, the San Antonio Spurs, I really felt like they came in with the mindset not to just win an NBA title, but I think seriously to prove a point to the world about what this organization has gone through. And really, it's about time that the San Antonio Spurs start earning the respect that they are a dominant NBA basketball franchise, one where you have to put in the context of dynasty.
Well, I mean, that says it right then and there. You know, I think one of the stats that I think ESPN maybe even put out there is that Duncan has never missed the playoffs. The team has never won less than 50 games, and now they have 5 titles, and he's basically done it over 3 quote-unquote decades, if you will, starting in the late 90s and now into the mid-2000s, if you will, teens, whatever. So I'm very impressed what San Antonio did. To come out here, they had an axe to grind, to beat the Miami Heat in 5 games, to shoot over 50% from the floor the entire series, 46% from the 3-point line, to get the contributions they got from their bench, Boris Diaw, whose career was over 2 times over, and comes here now and got his life in the Western Conference Finals and was such an impact on the series. Saw the emergence of Kawhi Leonard. What San Antonio did was legendary. I don't know if we'll see another NBA Finals like this because they just dominated from game one, and it really had a chance to sweep the series had they not missed 4 free throws after a Mario Chalmers flagrant foul in game 2. And who knows again if it could have went that way. And they just had a point to prove. Miami was overwhelmed, and it's sad to see that the Finals only win 5 games. But again, this is the way it goes, and I'm very, very excited for the San Antonio Spurs. And like you said, definitely prove their legacy with their 5th NBA championship.
Quixem, I want you to kind of follow up on what Warren was just talking about with how impressive the San Antonio Spurs played, not just in that Game 5, that closeout game, but really throughout the series. What were some of the things that really stood out from you? Because I know that earlier you were talking about the fact that really not a lot of people were giving realistic expectations about the San Antonio Spurs, dominating the way that they did. I think people had more of like an inkling of hope that they could pull out this victory in winning that NBA title, given what we're looking at the team holistically. So give me your perspective about what impressed you most about what this San Antonio Spurs team did through these 5 games of the NBA Finals.
Well, first of all, I was one of those guys who didn't think the series would end in 5. I had the Spurs in 6 as just on account of LeBron being so good and his supporting cast a lot better than I thought they would be. But the thing that stood out to me in this series was that the ball movement. The Spurs passed the ball 500 extra times in the Heat in the series, according to SportView, and they just decimated with ball movement. LeBron said it himself. They put you in positions that are just tough to handle, and their trapping scheme, their aggressive defense couldn't really handle the extra passes, the brilliant ball movement that the Spurs system entails. And that ultimately was the reason why this series ended in 5 and not 6, because the Spurs just, out-executed them, out-moved them, just outworked them. And Miami, by Game 4, you could tell they were just gassed, and they had little else to, just fight for.
You tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and we have a full panel discussion to give you the NBA Finals recap. Diego, let me go on let's go on the flip side here. We're talking about the Miami Heat. This Miami Heat team, they ran through their competition in the Eastern Conference, and I think everybody said if Dwayne Wade was going to be healthy, that it would literally be impossible for the San Antonio Spurs to best the Miami Heat. What happened to this Miami Heat team? It wasn't as if we saw signs of Dwayne Wade just suddenly breaking down the way that he did over the course of the last couple of games in this finals, because of the way that he played and helped elevate the Miami Heat to get past the Indiana Pacers rather easily.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, when you ask what happened to the Heat, obviously you look at the box scores and you can see that their offense completely broke down. They weren't able to score 100 points in any of the 5 games, especially when you look at games 4 and 5. Nothing was really going on. And I do think Wade is definitely a big part of that. The fact that in games 4 and 5, he really did not have the lift that he usually has. He couldn't, get a layup or a dunk attempt over Thiago Splitter. The fact that he couldn't turn the corner on Marco Bellinelli, obviously something was up there with him. Although he did say that he felt fine physically, I think that when you just look at him on the court, there was obviously something up, and that obviously was a factor. But I think that the main factor was the fact that LeBron James was shut down by Kawhi Leonard. The fact is that LeBron could not get to his spots where he could drive to the basket and make plays for other teammates. He was shut down, and although he played well, if you look at a box score, the only reason why he was shooting well was because he either had a pick and roll or he was making jumpers. But the fact that the Spurs were able to keep him out of the lane areas, he could not get to those spots where he could actually drive to the basket, kick out to open shooters, was the real reason why the Heat's entire offense broke down. I mean, Miami had a great offense throughout the entire season. They've had a great offense through this entire run, and then they met the Spurs, and it pretty much just shut them down. The fact that you had a team, that was very good on the offensive end with their ball movement, but also was able to shut down the head of that snake, is really why it was, 3 straight blowouts, and why this, as everyone has said, was a dominant finals akin to the 2004 Pistons-Lakers series, back 10 years ago.
You know, it's kind of interesting when we talk about this San Antonio Spurs team. We always talk about them as a team, especially with the kind of talent. And they've got legendary players. They've got Tim Duncan. They've got Manu Ginobili. They've got Tony Parker. They essentially are one of the founding members of what we consider the era of the Big Three. And given the fact that these guys have won world titles, we almost felt like it was going to come down to how these guys would step up and play to seriously have an impact on whether or not the Spurs were going to win this NBA championship. But there were some really key players that stepped up for the San Antonio Spurs and essentially, I mean, really changed the face of how we perceive championship teams are now to be built. And so, Paul, give me your perspective about these guys, these guys that really stepped up and kind of really shined in the spotlight of really one of the the big series. It's the NBA Finals, the championship games that we're talking about, and the San Antonio Spurs had a plethora of players that really stepped up and contributed to make this the dominant display of offense that we saw over these 5 games.
I think it goes back to something you saw in the regular season. If you follow them all 82 games, they were led in scoring multiple times by other guys outside of Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker, and it just manifests itself all the way to the playoffs, and it actually showed there in the finals. What Pop's done really with the system is he's got great guys with certain skill sets, and he's really implemented them. He's got Kawhi Leonard, for defense, for rebounding, gets out in transition. That's one of his main skill sets. He let go offensively. I mean, he just started going off in those last 3 games. But Kawhi has a certain skill set Pop uses. Danny Green's a shooter. He's an excellent on the ball defender. He's quick. He's agile. He's constantly moving in motion. You got Boris Diaw, who can pretty much do multiple things on both offense and defense. And after game 2, Pop put him in the starting lineup. That completely changed. Thiago Splitter, he wasn't used as much in this series because he plays at a slower pace. He likes to stay on guys that like to attack from a post type of position, like a Dirk Nowitzki or Marcus Aldridge. But even Thiago, he had some meaningful minutes in games 3 through 5 coming off the bench. He figured out a role to play with Manu in that pick and roll. And then of course you got Patty Mills, the one guy, 17 points that final game, and just. It's things that Spurs fans have seen all series. If you've covered the team all year, but it's just something. It's really cool to see how it manifests in the playoffs, and they really outperformed there. Patty especially, he has that skill set of coming off of the screen and popping that 3, or in a transition. Him and Danny Green both got the green light from Pop this year to pull that jumper since Gary Neal left.
The tone is obviously set. I think after we saw what the San Antonio Spurs did to the Miami Heat in Game 1. Now, everybody can attribute the fact that it was Game 1, it was at home. But I think we saw really some telltale signs about if the San Antonio Spurs played the way that they played in Game 1, that this was going to be a long series for the Miami Heat. And one of the things that really stands out is the defense of the Miami Heat. Clearly is not the same type of defense that we were accustomed to seeing over the course of the last 3 years in their championship run, be it that this was their 4th straight year playing in an NBA Finals. You've seen a decrease or a regression, more so you want to say, on defensive efficiency. Now, we can look at a lot of different things, and I know Warren and Quixem, you guys are going to kind of chime in on those things. But one of the things that's really interesting when you look at this San Antonio Spurs team is while their offensive efficiency got better over these last 2 years, the defense efficiency of the Miami Heat certainly regressed. I wanted to get your thoughts about that, Quixem, if that's what you saw became noticeably different, or is it really just the fact that there was tired legs that were out there on the floor?
The thing with Miami's system is that they kind of like to trap the ball handler. They try to put you in difficult positions, and that's hard to sustain over a long period of time. And LeBron's played an insane amount of minutes in the playoffs the last 4 years, his whole career, and I think that's hard to sustain. So I guess that's kind of why you saw them drop to 11th in defensive efficiency. And on to the Spurs point where they just, they've actually improved on that end. It's because I think they made a concerted effort to, focus on contesting shots, and they contest shots better than most. They're conservative in that regard compared to Miami. They don't trap as much. They kind of stay back. They hit back at the elbows, trying to, force you to take mid-range shots. And they just contest your shots. They just, trust their defense, trust their scheme. They rebound the ball defensively, one of the best teams in the league consistently. And they just wear you down on that. And on offense, they're just, it's a trickle-down effect. They kill you on offense when they're passing the ball moving, and then you don't have as much effort on either side. And I think that's what you saw in this series. Miami was gassed, and the Spurs, with their depth, with their with their ball movement, with their defense, they just kind of wore them out over time.
Warren, it is not amazing. The first game when we watched the San Antonio Spurs play, they turned the ball over some 20-something times, which we had said was going to be a recipe of disaster for these guys, and they still wound up winning the game. And then as they got further and further into the series, their turnover output was almost null and void, especially when they went on that blistering shooting display in game 4. So to me, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, wow, this San Antonio Spurs team offensively is just clicking on all cylinders. And you and I were watching the game in Game 5. We were sitting there saying, wow, this San Antonio Spurs team, the way that they're shooting the basketball, it's not a question of whether or not the ball is going to get into the rim because they were iron unkind all in the first half. It was the kind of looks they were getting. And so eventually, at some point, the ball was going to land into the basket, given the way that the Miami Heat were playing defense against that San Antonio Spurs offense.
Yeah, I mean, kind of to the point, the Heat weren't able to rotate simply because the Spurs were able to have multiple passers on the floor at all times. Spoelstra tried to counter what worked for him a little bit last year was putting LeBron on Parker, but they countered with Diaw, and Diaw actually led the all finals players in assists, I think with 5+ assists a game, more than Parker, more than even LeBron James. So if you're getting that kind of production from, a guy like Diaw, how can you really fail? Duncan is obviously a great passer as a big man, and then Parker was still able to muster 4 assists a game. But, the thing was the key with the ball movement. If it was on the post, it would swing back out to the corner, and then from the corner to the top of the key with the wing, then you see a guy cut back door, and they might hit that guy for a layup. Again, they shot 46% from 3. Miami just wasn't able to rotate. Wade was lackadaisical on defense. I'm sure, Diego, you have some thoughts about that. I think Van Gundy and some of even the finals broadcasters, they were just like, well, where's the effort from Miami? But when you keep the team moving consistently like that, like the Spurs did, there's not a lot you can do. Yes, the effort needed to be better, but San Antonio's ball movement was just so far superior that I just don't know a whole lot if the effort from Miami, even if it was a little bit better, if we don't still see the same outcome of the San Antonio Spurs winning the NBA championship.
Oh, I thought Diego was going to chime in right there.
Okay. Oh, yeah, so basically, yeah, that is true. And I think with the Heat, they haven't been as good of a defensive team pretty much all year, and I think you could attribute it to a number of things. For instance, they amnestied Mike Miller, maybe thinking that Shane Battier could come in and not realizing that Shane Battier was actually closer to retirement than actually meaningfully contributing on an NBA team. So that was part of it. I think the fact that you had Norris Cole, who did have his moments against Lance Stevenson in the conference finals, really was a non-factor. Also, Mario Chalmers did not do anything. That was a big thing, that the Heat couldn't get any production, any output, either offensively or defensively from their point guards. Chris Anderson looked like he was slow. And I do agree that it is part of the toil of just playing 4 straight finals, 4 straight full seasons. I mean, you look at 2011 when the Spurs actually had a great season, but then they end up losing in the first round to the Memphis Grizzlies, a bigger team, a stronger team, a team that sort of didn't really mesh with their style, and they got out in the first round. And so they had pretty much all those extra, 2 months extra off, and then the next year they lose in the conference finals to the Thunder, and they lose 4 straight games. So I think obviously the fact that you're playing 100+ games in the season is a factor. But I do agree that obviously, and Wade, he obviously was not fighting over screens like he should. And I mean, I think in last year's finals, the Heat also had some bad games on the defensive end of the floor. I think in Game 3 last year they lost by something like 36 points. Game 5 wasn't much better. But I think it was just the fact that I wasn't surprised by Games 1 and 3. I thought that maybe in Game 4 that they would definitely come out guns blazing and really win that game and tie up the series. But the fact that it didn't happen in that game and didn't happen in Game 5 was really something different, because we've always seen the Heat, even in the playoffs. I mean, this is why the Celtics took them to 7 games a couple of years back. They've always had their moments where they're not playing at the tip-top defensively, but the fact that it was such a consistent and never really turned on for them was the concern.
Okay. I have a question for you, Paul, because, as Diego just talked about the Heat there, I'm wondering from a Spurs perspective, did you expect some different adjustments from Miami per se. I know a lot of people, the coaches on Twitter were looking for Beasley and looking for Odin and guys like that to come out there on the floor. But, as a Spurs, guy who covers him, did you expect Miami to make some other adjustments more than they actually did in the finals?
One of our guys actually brought this up from Project Spurs earlier before the series even started. He thought that played the Rashard Lewis against Indiana, but he really did the Indiana series. So I think that had he shown like a lineup with maybe with Anderson or Haslam, in the beginning, just very traditional lineup. I know Miami's very small, but I think that he could have used that Rashard Lewis card, maybe thrown off Pop, and Pop would have made those adjustments later in the series. But overall, I mean, San Antonio was by far, they were just the margin of victory outside of Game 2 was just so. So wide. I thought that, I really thought for Game 5 he was going to start Ray Allen. Sure enough, he did. I mean, he didn't have much to go to. I mean, I didn't think Michael Beasley was going to do much if he did get any playing time. I mean, Beasley, and before Game 5, he's the only guy I've seen all year. He's eating a Pizza Hut pepperoni pizza before the game, like just chowing down in the locker room. And so, like, I didn't expect Beasley to be a big impact. I didn't expect Odin. It was Batty. I was just so shocked at how much he's progressed over the year. Like Diego said, he's right there on the tip of retirement. I mean, he didn't do anything this year. And then, I didn't think they were going to get much from Birdman, Chris Anderson, and Haslam, too, kind of didn't do a lot. Tim Duncan just ate him up in the paint whenever Haslam would get put in the game. But, yeah, outside of Ray Allen, and the thing you could really tell is if he put, I said this, if he puts Ray Allen in that starting lineup, there goes their bench. And sure enough, by the second quarter of Game 5, San Antonio had a 22-2 bench advantage. So, I mean, there wasn't much outside of LeBron that Spo could do to change up his game plan. I mean, they just didn't have the personnel this year. I think Pat Riley should take some of the blame for, not investing. He really, I mean, when you go back and think about it, this team pretty much, they almost lost in 6 games last year, had 28 seconds not, happen the way they did. And so if Riley knew, we almost lost that championship with 28 seconds left, I should have retooled my bench or, my depth. Instead, he goes and amnesties Mike Miller, and then, they don't really bring a lot of people in except Greg One. Obviously, it didn't work out.
I have another question too. Sorry, CL. Diego, what do you think happened to Mario Chalmers? Like, what happened? What was that even about?
I don't know. I've thought about it. I don't know if I can say anything. I mean, he's had games where he won't show up, but it seemed like every year in the finals he would always have one really good game. In Game 6 last year, he had 20-plus points. In Game 4, I think it was, at the 2012 finals, he had that one game where he actually made the game-winning shot, and he made a layup over Serge Ibaka, a great, shot blocker. But it's just the fact that, he didn't show up at all. I think it was really in his head. That's what I think it was. I think the fact that he never could get anything going. He was in foul trouble in Game 1, I think. The fact that, I think it was mental more than anything, because we've seen him play well. I mean, he's not going to be a consistent player. That's what you don't expect from a second-round pick. But the fact that he was able to come up in big moments every year, at least 1 or 2 times in a series, was all, I think, what the Heat needed at least 2 years ago or 1 year ago, is the fact that they just needed him to make, a few contributions here and there. He didn't need to be a consistent 15-point or 10-point scorer. The fact that he just needed to show up in a couple of games in a 7-game series and show up. But I think it was mental. I think the fact that he just really never got anything going, and the fact that when he found out the day of Game 5 that he wasn't starting, and then he was pretty much inserted in as a pretty much break the glass type of option along with Michael Beasley, was pretty much, okay, we've lost this series anyway, so just try to do something.
I mean, is that a telltale sign? And I'm going to ask you this question, Paul, with regards to Popovich's confidence in playing Patty Mills. It's very interesting to me. And Shaw brought up a very good point and a great question with regards to Mario Chalmers. It was something that I had noticed that really disturbed me, because it seemed more effort than it really was about him being ineffective. I felt that there were numerous times when the Heat wanted to push the basketball, Mario Chalmers is walking the ball up the court. There were moments where Patty Mills or Tony Parker burns Mario Chalmers, and as the Heat are trying to get into their sets, Mario Chalmers is trotting up the court. And one of the things I told Shaw in Game 5 that was such a telling sign about LeBron being on one level and the rest of the team just really not being anywhere near the same galaxy that he's in In that first quarter, when LeBron James is utterly dominating the San Antonio Spurs, whoever they put on him couldn't stop him. LeBron James had a running lane from the half-court line all the way down to below the three-point area. Once that first quarter ended, the first few attempts that the Miami Heat tried to get the ball to LeBron so he can start getting that shot, the San Antonio Spurs backcourt was somewhere halfway between half-court and the three-point line, already prepared to trap LeBron James before he got a running start to anywhere. And part of those possessions was because Mario Chalmers or Dwayne Wade were trotting themselves back up the court, allowing whoever it was that was sticking those guys to be free and literally force LeBron to give up the basketball without any room or spacing to operate the way that he was operating in the first quarter. And to me, I don't know if that was an adjustment that Popovich had made, but I know that it was something that was very telling when the Spurs started to turn up the heat defensively, forcing the Miami Heat to start taking bad shots, because the bad shots weren't being taken by LeBron James. They were being taken by other players that couldn't get good shots off because of how the Spurs were suffocating them on their rotations. Paul, I just wanted to get your perspective on this. Is it more that the San Antonio Spurs has had the Miami Heat's number, or were we really seeing that Game 5, that the wind was completely sucked out of them coming into that game, and it was really about the fact that they knew that they really didn't have a stone-cold chance in hell to beat the Spurs in this series?
I think it was the second one. I mean, I knew LeBron was going to come out guns blazing, and we saw that 17 points that first quarter. But, fatigue's going to set in eventually. He can't do it by himself. And, if you watch a lot of their games, I mean, from 1 through 5, the Spurs defense, they were sagging off of Dwayne and Mario on purpose. They would only kind of stay relatively close to Bosh and Lewis and Ray Allen. Those are the only three guys. Basically, the Heat offense is almost 3-on-5 sometimes. It was really bad. And so. I mean, just if they schemed. Kawhi Leonard was taking away LeBron's space. They were switching on any kind of pick and roll. Anybody from there was possessions where Patty Mills defended LeBron, Tony Parker. I mean, throughout the series, they were just trying to take away LeBron's space and basically saying, "Let your teammates beat us," and his teammates didn't. Chris Bosh didn't do a lot on his own in isolation situations. Dwayne Wade kind of ball stops the ball when he tries to create, and he doesn't have the legs. And then, I was asked this on a podcast a few days ago, what happened to Mario Chalmers too, and I really, it's so sad. Throughout 5 games, I actually forgot he was on the floor half the time. I wouldn't even recognize that he's out there, except for maybe the few times that he missed a three. I don't know if it was just chasing Tony. What might have happened was just putting LeBron on Tony a lot of the series. May have made Chalmers defend one of the Spurs' attacking guards like Manu or Kawhi or somebody like that, or even chasing, even playing a guy like Danny Green or Bellinelli is a pain in the butt because you have to just constantly be moving around the floor. It's like guarding Ray Allen almost. You have to be running around screens and trying to stop these guys from getting open looks from three-point range. And I don't know if it was the Spurs' activity, and then also having when Patty Mills comes in, he's a guy who plays both ends, so almost full court press. And so I don't know if it's just something they're not used to playing in the Eastern Conference. They just came from a team in Indiana that plays half court basketball half the time, very slow pace. Whereas in San Antonio, Pop's just constantly just telling them to run. So I think that LeBron did what he could, but San Antonio was a better team overall.
Quixem, it's interesting that you brought that part up, and it's a great excellent point that you brought up, Paul. Quixem, man, this series, Tony Parker did not look impressive. And I felt like after last year when he suffered that hamstring injury that was partly the reason why the San Antonio Spurs couldn't sustain doing what they needed to do in order to finish out the Miami Heat and win that NBA Finals from last year. It just actually surprised me that going into this, I said that Tony Parker was going to be paramount for this Spurs team to be able to do what they needed to do offensively, and he was absolutely ineffective. I mean, he scored some points, but for the majority of the time, Popovich put his trust more in Patty Mills and Danny Green and Kawhi Leonard and literally everybody else. It's almost like he shielded Tony Parker. Was this more because he was still injured, or it's just that this is what happens with Tony Parker now when he's playing in big game situations?
I think it's just a testament to the Spurs system. And it's just like Tony Parker kind of looks kind of wonky, kind of doesn't do his thing. Then you put Patty Mills there, and you get the bench unit in, and it just retains the same amount of movement, the same amount of spacing. And he kind of saved Parker for the fourth quarter. And you saw Parker, he scored 8 points in the fourth quarter, kind of as a death knell, like kind of closing the series, because he still had some juice in him. It's just not necessarily that he was a little injured, but he played well enough. And if you look at the closeout games, it's team effort kind of going above the grain and doing that. So, I mean, sometimes the Spurs system is just so good, so efficient, so well-oiled that, I mean, you just put Patty Mills in there and you don't really lose much. And in fact, I mean, they were better on the floor with Patty Mills, at least offensive efficiency-wise, from this entire season. So it's just a credit to the Spurs, credit to the system for, having that confidence and being able to, say, hey, Tony, you don't need to play 30 minutes in the finals for us to win a big clinching series game. I think that's what it comes down to.
Can I give a quick point real quick?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Looking back at all their championships, San Antonio, they've always had a guy score over 20 points a game, and this was the first year overall in the playoffs they didn't have one. Tony finished at 18 points a game overall in the playoffs, and like Quixem said, it just speaks to Pop's system. He had a number of guys just come in, contribute for minutes, and then if Tony wasn't having a good night or he was injured or something, guys picked it up. They had pretty much almost 8 scorers who could really take over a game, not to take over a game, but take over a quarter at any time in this season and the playoffs.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. San Antonio Spurs are your 2014 NBA champions, taking out the Miami Heat in 5 games in impressive fashion, 15 plus. Well, what does that number mean? That is the differential of the Spurs winning by at least 15 plus points, at least 3 different occasions en route for them winning that NBA championship. The fact that the San Antonio Spurs literally dominated the Miami Heat offensively is a one-of-a-kind thing to a lot of people. I'm sure that they were not anticipating it. Let's talk about the MVP, Kawhi Leonard. I mean, now, Diego, now that we have the MVP in Kawhi Leonard, are we going to treat him like we treated Paul George when he took the Miami Heat to 7 games and he literally put himself on the map as being a perennial superstar? Are we now going to start finally talking about Kawhi Leonard in that same type of breath because of the performance that he put on in the last 3 games of this series?
I would say no. I already mentioned the 04 final series of Pistons and Lakers, and I would think that it's sort of the same thing. The first time since 04 that the Finals MVP is not an All-Star. And, that's what – and that Pistons team sort of – you can see the similarities to the Spurs and Greg Popovich's team and how he runs, how it's not really 1 star or 2 stars do it. It's multiple guys. So I don't think that Kawhi Leonard is going to become, one of the top players because that's not what he is. He plays very well in his system. I know that Larry Bird is surely kicking himself for trading him for George Hill. But I think that the fact that he plays in the Spurs, the fact that it's a very small market team, the fact that you have the mainstays in Duncan, Parker, and Ginobili will really not put any of the spotlight or the limelight on him. And I think that may not be bad. And he may not even want it. I mean, you look at a guy like Greg Popovich. He doesn't want the limelight. He doesn't want the spotlight. He was, not even on the stage with his players. He wanted them all to soak it up. He's one of those guys who doesn't like to be in the limelight like a Phil Jackson. He's fine being in a small market like San Antonio, and credit to him. So I don't think we'll see him, be hoisted up as a rival to LeBron James or KD. I think that he's going to be known as a very good system player like Chauncey Billups was.
But Shaw, are you buying into that? Because Kawhi Leonard averaged 17.8 points in the first couple of games, shooting at 61%, and then in games 3 through 5, I mean, he jumps up to 23.7, a blistering 68.6%. I can't believe that it's just simply because, he doesn't have it, within him. And to me, when you see somebody doing like that, I mean, that literally is trying to put yourself on the map. I think in some people's opinion, when you see how Kawhi Leonard actually executed in these 3 games, and ultimately even in that closeout game. But I mean, Diego does bring up some good points about how we should perceive and skew those numbers.
Well, absolutely correct. Diego sounded a little like Kevin Durant, though. I don't know if you guys saw that stuff on Twitter where KD was kind of going in on Kawhi, saying basically he wasn't that good, and he was a product of the San Antonio system. And while some of that may be true, from what I hear in Spurs town, and I'm definitely going to let these guys kind of speak to it, is that they do believe Kawhi is the future. He does have the ability to be a go-to player. And what we saw in these NBA Finals was a guy who was supremely confident. I remember we were watching Game 5, CL, and when he kind of sized LeBron up a little bit on that left wing for a jumper, and I was like, is he gonna? And he's like, yeah, he shot it, and he made it. And there was some times he came down here off the dribble, shooting a couple threes, where it's just a confidence thing. And although he may not have the demeanor that everybody may think he needs to have to be a superstar, Tim Duncan didn't come into the league as a guy who was very explosive and hooting and hawing and pumping his chest either. So I think Kawhi is just kind of in that mold right now. But let me not talk about it. I'd love to hear from Quixem and Paul. What you guys think about it? Can Kawhi Leonard be that next guy for the Spurs? Can they build around him? Quixem, why don't you jump in first?
For sure. I mean, where his development has from we're going from a rookie year where he had like an inconsistent jumper. He wasn't aggressive. He's just completely turned into a different player. And that shouldn't be a knock on him. The fact that he's excelled and thrived in the Spurs system, it should be appreciated, because although this is probably the best situation in the NBA, he possibly could have been thrown in a situation where you have Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu, and Pop kind of nurturing him along the way. He's just kind of been able to sit back and work on his things, tinker things in the offseason, do little things, work on his mid-range shot, get him more, work on his defensive, just first and foremost improving his shot, because when he came out of the league, he was a sub 30% shooter, and now he's making 38% of his shots from three, and he's just been aggressive, pulling up from three in transition, which we saw in Game 5, pulling up for mid-range shots, and he's just a completely different player. And I think as you see Tim Duncan kind of slowly start to fade away in the limelight, and same with Manu, you're going to see Kawhi kind of flourish, and I can see him definitely being an all-star caliber player in the future. I mean, geez, he's only 22. I mean, Parker said, yeah, just don't put too much pressure on him. He's just 22. So there's a lot of room improvement for him to make, and I don't see why not. He can't be the franchise player they envision him being.
What say you, Paul, on the maturation, the evolution of Kawhi Leonard and what you saw in this NBA Finals?
Like you guys described, it was pretty remarkable, those 3 20-point games. He hadn't done that actually all series in a row. Actually, he only had 3 20-point games in the regular season altogether. So it was pretty remarkable that he did that. But I think that the biggest thing was, as you guys mentioned, his confidence. I mean, he was going in that Game 5. He was going toe-to-toe with LeBron James by halftime. He was only 5 points shy of LeBron. He was only 2 rebounds shy of LeBron. I mean, this is arguably the best player in the world right now. So he doesn't shy away from the the competition. I'm not sure he's gonna be an immediate All-Star next year, or even maybe that second year, because the Spurs are gonna still run that system. Where he's really gonna benefit is when Pop's sitting Tim out some nights, Tony out some nights, and Manu out. So he'll get to. I think Pop will put more of an emphasis on the offense on him. Today I was at the media session. The exit meeting, and Pop actually joked and says that he actually lied, that he's not going to give him any plays because Kawhi did pretty well without plays. But I think he will call his number a few times. We saw an old play they used to run with Richard Jefferson in Game 5 was that alley-oop from Boris Diaw. That was an old play for a small forward that they usually don't. That was actually the first time I've actually seen it with Kawhi this year. But yeah, he's definitely, like Quixem said, in the offseason, he's been tinkering with different things. He's been adding new little wrinkles to his game. This year, in the beginning of the season, October to about December, they were trying to get him to run the pick and roll. He was having a lot of trouble with it, turning the ball over, trying to squeeze in between spaces, and he wasn't doing it as well. But after he got hurt, and then after he came back from that injury, I mean, he was on another level. What really gets him going is his defense and his transition. That's what Pop says, and you can just see it. I mean, defense and rebounding. Because if he gets a defensive rebound, he's taking off down court. There's so many highlights of him dunking and just going crazy in the open court. I think it just adds to his his confidence. And then I think he's one of those guys who gets a spark from defense when he knows he's really just giving LeBron no space, giving Kevin Durant no space. I think it fuels him on the other end. He almost it might almost seem like he's unstoppable for some possessions. And you saw that. I mean, there was so much emotion out of him in Game 5, especially when he did that pull-up three. I mean, the crowd was going nuts. I mean, he just got that crowd going crazy, and every time he went to the free throw line, people were chanting MVP. So I'm not sure if he'll be an immediate All-Star, but I definitely see it as the future. They're going to start putting more of the emphasis on him scoring-wise. Today he actually had there was an article with USA Today with Jeff Zildjian from there, and he actually told Jeff that I'm going to start picking up the scoring load more in the future because teams now know what I do. They're going to start scouting me more, and so that's something to look at this next season coming up.
Paul, I think that's a great point there on Kawhi, and I think we've really talked about this NBA Finals as best we probably could, man. Broken it down from every angle, but now it's time to kind of transition into what are these teams going to do next. Diego, we're going to start with you in the Miami Heat, man. Listen, lots of questions about what's going to happen over here. These three guys, do they opt in? Do they opt out? I'm going to just jump in and say one thing real quick, and I want you to kind of spark the conversation out after that. I think there's no way that Wade can opt out right now. I don't think he can leave that amount of money on the table. But I think if he does opt in, that causes friction for LeBron and Bosh and how this team is going to move forward going into next season. What's your take on these three guys, and where's Miami going to go from here, man?
Yeah, so I think obviously it is in Wade's financial interest to opt in. He's not going to get that money anywhere else. But, you saw, I think it was after Game 3, that ESPN story about how the Heat think that they might get Carmelo Anthony and the Big Three to all sign. And so I basically think that, that story basically proves to me that the Heat are in the same situation. Pat Riley is in the same situation that Mitch Kupchak was in 2011 when his team just won 2 championships and then got dominated by the Dallas Mavericks in the second round. And what did Mitch Kupchak do? He tried to get Chris Paul. Now, unfortunately for him, Davis Stern nixed that trade. So I think that's where that's coming from, the fact that you feel like you do need to reload and you do need to get a star-level type of player. I think, I don't want to comment on that because there is really so much up in the air in terms of do they opt in, do they opt out. As you said, if Wade opts in, then that pretty much cancels any chance of that happening. But I think for the Heat, in terms of their ideal scenario, would be all 3 opting out and then all 3 taking smaller deals, taking pay cuts again. I don't know how they feel about that, but taking pay cuts again to try to get some better players. If they don't want to go after that big fish in Melo, I think that one thing that they could do, and maybe you could even address this in the draft, is to get a point guard in the draft. I mean, the fact that they didn't have any output from either Mario Chalmers or Norris Cole was something that is a problem. The fact that their bench was exposed, the fact that you have Shane Batty, who is not playing anymore, and Ray Allen, who may not play anymore. The fact that Chris Anderson is going to opt out, according to Mark Spears. So they definitely have a lot to look at. A lot is up in the air, but I think for the Heat, it's just about making sure that you get the Big Three to opt out, and then assure that Pat Riley that they're going to take pay cuts again, so that the Heat can continue putting quality level players around them. Because if that's not the case, then they cannot really put anybody else around them who's going to be a quality piece.
Diego, I got to ask you this question real quick because you brought up something pretty interesting and something that I had alluded to before we jumped on the air and had this started having our panel discussion. In my personal opinion, I have serious qualms about the idea of the Big Three coming back, not from a financial perspective, but from a chemistry perspective. I felt that Chris Bosh basically kind of subdued himself to fit in with whatever the Miami Heat were really trying to do and execute. Now, Chris Bosh has become a great perimeter guy. He has a little bit of that Euro style in him, but I feel that his game has really regressed in the sense that you can't ask this guy to come out and give you, 20, 25 on a consistent basis because he doesn't do work in the paint anymore. He used to do that when he was playing with the Toronto Raptors. I don't think that even now at this particular age and at this particular juncture in his career, he's not relatively old, but he ain't relatively young either. And he's not developed his body in a way that he can take that kind of pounding, given that the Eastern Conference is getting preferably bigger now with the front court players. That being said, I said it was going to be an either or. You either have the Bosh and LeBron, or you have Bosh and Wade. But I don't feel like you can have both. Are you buying into that? They can still make it happen with this quote-unquote Big Three.
I mean, it's interesting that you bring it up with Bosh because I think Zach Lowe had a piece in which he interviewed Bosh, and Bosh said that he doesn't like to post up anymore because he thinks that the Heat's defensive system is too tiring. The fact that on him, as the center, he's the one who has to trap the pick-and-roll guy. He's the one who has to dive back to the paint to get the guy who's rolling to the basket. It was a very interesting quote that he said that because the defense is asking him to move so much and be everywhere, he feels that he doesn't want to bang with bodies down in the post. So I do think that he's not going to be that. He never really was that guy, and he won't be that guy. But I do think that they can still coexist in terms of a chemistry perspective. They won 2 championships. They made it to 4 NBA finals. You don't want to mess up with something good. I think people had a lot of questions when they first came together whether they could play together. And I think if you look at some moments, in the last couple of years, you can say that, yes, they did have a lot of great moments, a lot of stretches when they were just dominant offensively. But I do think that they're going to have to move Bosch into that permanent second option role. And the fact that he's not going to, I mean, I think that he should take the threes when they are open, but I think aside from that, he should really be, exploiting the fact that he can get his man up in the air with a pump fake and then drive to the basket, maybe get to the foul line. And I think Wade will sort of have to be that third option guy. So I do think that they do have a lot of questions to be answered, but I think if you restructure that offense and have Bosch take more of that role and don't ever have him go a game where he's only taking 4 shots, as was the case in Game 3. The fact that he can have a good first quarter and then people forget about him and don't feed him the ball. He needs to be the guy who says, no, I am the second best player on this team. I need to take between 15 and 20 shots a night. I need the ball in my hands. And so I think that's what they need to do. But I don't think that they should take out one of the big three. I think that they've proven that they can still be an effective team and an effective trio.
Okay, so Quixem, let me ask you this question. We just witnessed probably one of the most dominant performances by a team in the San Antonio Spurs, and I had said that you have to actually put this San Antonio Spurs team in the conversation as one of the greatest NBA teams with the way that they played and against really the best team that came out of the Eastern Conference. Can't control whether or not we thought that the Miami Heat can be comparable to the Chicago Bulls or the Detroit Pistons or any of these other teams that we make the conversation. I'm just saying, you look at it statistically, this San Antonio Spurs team put on a display that in my mind is a top 10 worthy display of NBA greatest teams. That's just me. I'm not saying that they're the best, but they definitely are not someone where you put them in the back of the pile, because it was no fluke on what we saw these guys do for 5 games. But with that being said, do you tinker with it? Do you realize that was this a one-year wonder with what the San Antonio Spurs did because of how the Western Conference is currently structured? How did the Spurs build on putting themselves back in this conversation for a 3rd year straight with an opportunity to win an NBA title?
Well, Pop said it himself. I mean, it's not the Spurs way to kind of make these huge adjustments, especially coming off this historic finals run. And he said today that, don't expect changes. Don't expect us to make these moves. And with a couple of free agents in Boris Diaw, Patty Mills, Aaron Baines, and Matt Bonner, those are the 4 free agents that are, off the books this year. I wouldn't expect them to make changes either. I mean, this team is still plenty good. I mean, Tim Duncan's going to be 38, turning 39 next year. Monty's kind of 37. You don't know what to expect from him. But ultimately, this team is good enough with their current parts to contend. And although I have some little qualms about facing Oklahoma City again, especially if they're healthy, that's a matchup that I don't know if the Spurs can get through that if Ibaka's completely healthy. But ultimately, this team is just good enough with the way they are, and I expect them to re-sign Patty and re-sign Boris around market value and run with this team again, because I mean these players love each other. They play incredible basketball, some just amazing display about. There's a couple videos of it just showing you the beauty of Spurs basketball, and I expect them to continue that to change and see if that holds, and they might not make it to the finals next year, but I think they're going to be damn close, and I expect maybe a Western Conference Finals berth at the very least.
I think that's an excellent point there you made there, Quixem, and I kind of wanted to go to you now, Paul. They do have some options here. Do you think Duncan may even opt out to try to give them some more flexibility? I saw a tweet, I think, earlier that the salary cap might be roughly around $61 million going into next season. Those numbers are, kind of projected. I think the Spurs are at $53 million in committed salary if Duncan opts in. But would he opt out to maybe even take even a lesser deal to give them more flexibility to maybe to help sign Boris Diaw at market value, to help sign Patty Mills at market value? What do you think about that?
I don't know if he'd opt out this for those 2 players. I think Boris is going to work. He's going to get something relatively, with management today. He didn't want to say that he would re-sign here, but he kind of just inclined that he would, and he basically said he wants to play it in a system like the Spurs, where there's a lot of passing, a lot of team involvement, and things like that, which is pretty much San Antonio. So I think Boris is definitely a lock. He's got Tony here, and they'll figure out something financially. He's already 30, going on 33 years old. Patty's a big one. I think I don't know if they'd ask Duncan to, because I mean he's done this before, where he's taken a salary decrease just to help bring in other players. Unless I think it's another piece that they have out there on their mind. somewhere out there that we don't know about. It's maybe not a marquee free agent, but a little bit of a higher ranking type of free agent. Then I could see them maybe talking to him and doing that. But I really doubt that he does that. I haven't got that kind of that kind of glimpse of them trying to do that. The big one for me though is just still Patty. I'm not sure. There's argument that he's a system player. That's why he's thriving so well with Pop's system. But then there's also, he's still kind of young. He's 25, 26, and he needs to go, set a future for himself. And right now, the way he played, he's going to probably get a pretty, pretty decent contract. And so it may be kind of hard for him to turn down. And I'm not sure if San Antonio would want to match whatever a team throws at him. So yeah, it really right now for me, I don't think that Tim would take less right now unless they know they're getting somebody a little bit higher up. And Patty, I think is just the one oddball out there who we don't know if he's coming back.
Okay. So I mean, as you mentioned about getting something maybe a little bit higher or a marquee guy, I think it was ESPN said that the Spurs now may be one of those quote unquote sleeper teams in the Kevin Love sweepstakes. And is that something that you think the Spurs could realistically do from a financial standpoint, from a system standpoint? Do you think that's a guy that would fit in San Antonio moving forward? Again, ESPN said it out there. They're the worldwide leader. But just really trying to get some perspective on that.
Did you say worldwide leader or worldwide leak? I'm just sorry. My hearing, just kind of copping out on me.
Well, whatever. I mean, it's interesting to talk about. So I'll get Paul, then Quixem, you can follow in right after that.
I don't know, I mean, obviously San Antonio will love Kevin Love, but it depends what you have to give up for him. And I don't think Minnesota wants a guy like, I'd probably say on the trading block is maybe like a guy like Marco Bellinelli, Danny Green, and there's not much out there. They're not going to get rid of the big three. They would never do that. They're already up there in age. Parker, I mean, I'm not sure if they would do it for Parker, but Parker would obviously still kind of looks as a tradable piece. He still has a decent contract, and he's almost hitting near that latter stage in his career. Maybe even a guy like Thiago Splitter could be a kind of contract. But these aren't kind of players that Minnesota's going to want for a talent like Kevin Love. They're going to want somebody like Kawhi Leonard in return. They're going to want somebody, maybe a Parker. I'm not sure, but yeah, I really don't see it on San Antonio's roster that they have the trade pieces. What's your thoughts, Quixem?
Logically, it's kind of hard, like Paul said, to really rejigger a trade. I mean, Kawhi Leonard would be really enticing to Minnesota, but the Spurs would not jump on that trade at all. They'd hang up. And Thiago Splitter has a big contract. He's going to be making $8 million in the next 2 years, $16 million in the next 2 years, give or take. And it's kind of tough to see them kind of taking Thiago Splitter's contract and putting him alongside Pekovic, because that's kind of an awkward spacing issue that doesn't help him long term. Kind of poses some problems there. I mean, you have Danny Green, you have some little little value players, but it's kind of hard to put a legitimate trade package together for Kevin Love, especially when there's teams vying for Kevin Love with high draft picks and kind of assets and throwing stuff at there. The Spurs can't contend with that. Where they can contend, and ultimately it's the best fit there for Kevin Love because he can just learn with Pop, but it's just too tough to find a legitimate trade to work and fit him in there. It might be, if anything, maybe he could come as a free agent, but that's still kind of tricky too because I don't know how that's going to work with Kawhi Leonard's extension, but Kevin Love to the Spurs would be an awesome fit. I can't think of a better fit, but I don't think it's going to work out.
Okay, so those are your guys' dream free agent. You know what I'm saying? Your fantasy free agent pickup, right? Okay, good. So I'm gonna flip this back to you. Let's go back to Miami. You have the money. You have the pull. You got Pat Riley still. If you had somebody that you wanted to add to the Miami Heat roster that would legitimize them being the team to beat, and say you still got the big three, but who would be that added piece that you're looking at that's available right now in free agency? And if that guy was available, and let's say we're speaking realistically, there had to be a means to trade for. But I'm saying, who is that person that really stands out to you? Be like, yo, I want him on my team for 2014, 2015.
You know what? I mean, I mentioned this earlier. Carmelo Anthony is a player who apparently, according to Mark Stein, and I think it was Brian Windhorst, the Heat might be interested in getting, according to Stephen A. Smith. LeBron and Melo are interested in playing together on the same team. I have mixed feelings. I think he would definitely help the offense. I think it would actually put Melo in that role that might be the best thing for him, which is that Olympic team type of role where he can really be a spot-up shooter, drive to the basket if he wants to, but not be the number one guy. And I just don't know if Carmelo Anthony is at that point where he's ready to cede that. He's ready to admit that, you know what, I can't win on my own. So I think I am intrigued, and I don't know how it would work out with the defense because he's 30 years old too. So if you sign him to a really long contract, especially in the third, fourth, and fifth years of that deal, I mean, we see what happens to people as they age. But he is someone who I think, if you just read the tea leaves, the Heat might be interested in signing, and they would be able to do it. Maybe they'd have to sign them all for about $15 million to start out with, but he would be the player who might be the guy who's going to help turn them around and help them win a championship for next year.
So you want Lala and MIA? Nice.
Wait, I heard that they were headed to Splitsville, or is that has that been?
Oh, that's a whole other show. That's a whole other show. So
yeah, because if she's not coming with him,
it's not worth it.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your take with that because, interesting enough, getting Carmelo keeps Miami playing smaller, and that keeps him without a post presence. There's not a lot of great centers in free agency available right now, but maybe if you were able to work something out via trade, I'm just surprised that more Heat guys, people who follow the team, don't want any type of post presence out there, don't want a guy who can kind of throw the ball down to and say, go get me a basket. And I guess they feel like LeBron would be able to do that sometimes if he played more in the post. But, I just find that very interesting that nobody's looking at Miami and say, why don't they get a true five and move Bosh back to his 4 position?
Well, I mean, the reason is because, number one, as you said, there aren't that many true post options. And you mentioned trade, but I don't know who they could use in a trade. They don't have a lot of pieces. I think Wade, if he was included in a trade, I don't think Pat Riley is trading Wade. I think he's too loyal for that. If Pat Riley did not want to trade Haslam for Evan Turner, then I don't think he's trading Wade for anybody. I think Pat Riley's loyal. That's why he kept on to P.J. Brown. That's why he kept on to the 06 team that won a championship for a year, even though it was a one-hit wonder year. So Pat Riley's not trading Wade. But even if that was an option, I think that Wade would only be used in a deal if he opted in, and it would only be a trade if the Heat agreed to take back a really, really bad salary. Just because I think that the finals have really hurt his trade value right now. I don't really see any other trade options they could use. Maybe a Bosh, but I mean, are you saying that they would trade Bosh for Dwight Howard? I don't know, but I do agree that the reason why the Heat people don't say that is because you have a post player already. You have LeBron James, who now has emerged as his go-to game a lot of the time, is his post game, and the fact that you have a player who is a 3, who's number one already bigger and stronger than most opposing 3s, and the fact that you can have the spread floor where and you saw it, I think it was best displayed against the Thunder when you have 4 out and 1 in, so you have LeBron doing everything and he's finding all these open shooters. That's really when they are at their best. And you can look back to the Magic when they had Dwight Howard and 4 shooters. That's what the Heat are trying to formulate with their roster. So I don't know who would they get. I mean, I think it's as much a question of feasibility as it is about fit, because there just aren't that many back-to-the-basket players. Andrew Bynum, I mean, people were talking about him, the Heat signing him, but he did nothing for the Indiana Pacers. He's done with. Who could they add? I've not looked at the free agent list, to be honest with you, so I just don't know if it's A, realistic, or B, if it's really even a matter of fit.
I think, well, my point with that too, and then I want to definitely jump to the Spurs thing before we wrap up here real quick, is, I'm not even saying maybe that they need to get a starting caliber power. I mean, center per se, but even somebody who can give them a different look in that second unit. Someone, I don't know, like a Chris Kaman or somebody relatively cheap. Who's a veteran guy who can definitely help that roster, can score on.
I would love Chris Kaman. I mean, well, I haven't seen him for the last couple of years. I hope that the Heat would have signed him if he got waived by the.
Just so you know, beard has gotten longer. Kaman, so just so that you know.
What's that?
What?
Beard has gotten longer.
Oh, Captain Kaman.
I mean, if they could get Kaman, that I don't know. I haven't seen him, but a couple of years ago, I think there was some talk about him maybe getting waived, and I thought he might be a good piece. But I mean, I don't know.
True. And before I go and jump to you guys on the Spurs and CL after that, obviously you need to wrap up. But do you guys think you need a true point guard behind Tony Parker, or are you guys okay in your passing system that allows your bigs to really thrive and pass from the post and pass from the mid post as well? Or do you think that's something you need to really address, like with a true dishing point guard behind Tony Parker? Paul, why don't we start with you?
Not necessarily. They have Corey Joseph still back there. He's going to be coming up on his final year this next season. He was drafted at the same time as Kawhi. They still have him as a project that they're working with. He's shown some strides from the regular season and the playoffs if they do lose Patty. But, I think as long as you have a guy who has a really good skill set, which is pretty much being a shooter and who can really pass the ball, keeps the tempo going, I think you're okay with not having a true backup point guard. I think they're relatively okay if they do lose Patty. That's the benefit of having Patty right now, is that he does that for you. But Corey's pretty good about managing the game. He's not as aggressive as a shooter as Patty is. But it's the offseason. Patty wasn't. Patty all of a sudden became this crazy guy this following season after working hard in the summer. So it's very interesting to see what will happen with Corey Joseph. But as long as, like I said, it just depends on the skill set that whoever they try to bring up or bring in. Whatever that skill set is for that player, I think that person can come in and just thrive in that system. It doesn't have to necessarily be a point guard.
And Quixem?
Yeah, I agree with Paul completely. It's not about the whole prototypical point guard. It's about a guy who just isn't a ball stopper, a guy who won't stop the flow of the offense, because that's what makes the Spurs so good, that they're just moving and they're moving the ball across court there, they're doing a screen there, dribble handoff there. They just need a guy who will continue to buy into that system and move the ball. And honestly, a lot of times Manu Ginobili is kind of essentially the backup point guard for Tony Parker. In a lot of instances, he kind of shares a lot of the ball handling responsibility when Patty isn't playing as much. And Corey Joseph, he's kind of uneven, solid defender. You saw what he kind of did against Serge Ibaka with the dunk. He's still kind of there. He's not completely there, and maybe he develops into something. He's cheap, and he's kind of has a low minutes role, so that's something to look out on. The thing I think the Spurs would need to look at, and it's kind of a minor thing, but it'd be maybe a backup for Kawhi, a guy who can play 15 minutes, a guy who won't be completely terrible, just a guy to give him some burn, because we don't want to extend Kawhi and play him 35 minutes a night. You don't want that to happen. And the front court rotation is fine. You have Boris Diaw, excellent passer, Thiago Splitter, excellent passer, Tim Duncan still at 38, just putting up insane numbers. In Jeff Ayers, I mean, some people hated on him, but in limited spurts, he can guard pick and rolls kind of aggressively. So, I mean, there's not a lot of things that you can look at that, the Spurs definitely need. And if Patty Mills does jump ship, I think they can make it do with, a rotation of Marco Bellinelli, Manu Ginobili, Corey Joseph kind of handling the reins. And this Spurs team can still continue to gel, because that's what the Spurs do. You lose someone in free agency like Gary Neal, you plug someone else in, and you win a championship. That's just what it boils down to.
Yeah, I think I definitely do agree with Quixem real quick. That the small forward area is definitely an area they're going to address. Last year in the draft, they actually were targeting those kind of players. They got Deshaun Thomas out of Ohio State. He didn't work out. He was a second-round pick. He's playing overseas right now in, I think, France. And then even in the offseason, they were getting guys like Corey Maggette. They gave him a shot early in the preseason. And then they finished the season with Damian James, on a 10-day deal, and then they cut him right before the playoffs, or the deal expired basically right before the playoffs started. So I definitely think the small forward position is going to be a position they're going to look at, because they do kind of become susceptible whenever Kawhi gets in foul trouble. But there are also some veterans out there. A guy like Mike Miller is about to. I think he's off the books for the Grizzlies, and they were rumored to be interested in him when he got bought out by Miami last year. So it might be a veteran, even a guy. I mean, it's crazy saying this, but it kind of makes sense. A guy like Richard Jefferson, he's off the books. I know he didn't work out here in San Antonio the first time, but just to have him on the bench for about 5-10 minutes if you need him. He's a big body. He knows the system already. Can shoot the three. He's kind of got developed in a Spurs type of way over those 3 years that he was here. So I mean, there's plenty of options out there. But yeah, I definitely think that, as Quixem said, if they do lose Patty, that they can just plug somebody in or get somebody on a relatively decent contract.
Well, I definitely say this much. This NBA Finals really kind of brought up a lot more questions and also opened our eyelids really to the coming of age of two franchises, two organizations. While we often talk about how the Miami Heat have more fair weather friends, I think as long as Pat Riley is running the helm, we have to start respecting the Miami Heat organization as a legitimate franchise, one of success. 2 NBA championships in a 4-year time span. They've done what was necessary to build a team that was championship worthy. Can nobody take that away? And then you look at the San Antonio Spurs, a model of excellency. This team, in the course of the big 3 of Tim Duncan, and even prior to that, when David Robinson was the foundation for what basically has become one of the more dominant teams in the NBA, and more importantly, there's one other thing I think people are not taking into consideration that probably they should get a lot of credit for. The San Antonio Spurs are the only other team, aside from Boston Celtics, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Chicago Bulls, to have more than 4 NBA championships. And this is a small market franchise that is doing it. Where we talk about teams like the Detroit Pistons, teams, Los Angeles Clippers, even though they've never won a championship, they're big markets. And for what the San Antonio Spurs have been able to do through the course of the early 90s, mid-90s, all the way up until this point now is just truly remarkable, and it's a testament to where the direction is going with the NBA. 9 international basketball players on this roster, the most in the NBA, and these guys came together and figured out a way to win an NBA championship. And that just really is the Spurs way. So impressive showing by the San Antonio Spurs, and really an inkling of what may be to come. Another system that could be in the cog of probably one of the most lethal conferences in the next few years, being the Western Conference. I just want to thank everyone that has jumped on this evening to help really bring light and perspective around these 2 teams and this NBA Finals. I want to thank my man Diego Quezada from the Miami Heat beat writer for Ha Ha Hoops. Excellent, excellent, excellent guy. Please check him out. He does his thing. You can also catch him on the Twitter handle, especially as we do our coverage through the offseason, the NBA draft, and leading up into the upcoming season. I want to thank my man Paul Garcia, who also jumped on with us and gave great insight. Definitely one of the best writers you'll catch regarding the Spurs. And our man Quixem Ramirez, who's also a great writer as well, too. You catch these guys on Project Spurs. They do an excellent job. And, how can I do this show without my right-hand man, 50 Grand, my boy Warren Shaw? You know his website, www.shawsports.net, keeping his finger on the pulse of everything regarding basketball, but also covers baseball, football, little entertainment as well, too, boxing. I mean, just a great overall display of insight from all of you guys. And I really can't say much more than just being just an excellent show to wrap up the NBA Finals.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure having us. I mean, pleasure having me, at least. Pleasure. Whatever.
Don't be shy about it, fellas.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
No, that's what's up. Thank you, guys. I mean, I know you guys kind of jumped on last minute, but it was excellent, and I can't wait to talk summer leagues, talk draft with you guys, and definitely when we move into the season next year, we'll definitely have you guys on again soon. So we can't wait to relink with you guys again, and thanks again for joining us tonight, man.
Yeah. Good talking to all y'all.
Cool. Most def. All right, so for the baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate everybody checking us out. The 2014 NBA Finals recap. Keep us locked as we continually keep covering the NBA in the offseason. The NBA draft is coming on the horizon, about a week away. Be sure to check us out as we give you the 411 and everything you need to know around your favorite teams in the NBA draft. For the baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, you guys have a great evening.